$22.4 billion Pan-Asian gas grid and oil security pipeline system, extending throughout all of Asia, from Siberian fields through Central Asia and to the Middle East energy giants, also integrating the consumer states. Furthermore, Asian countries hold more than $2 trillion worth of foreign reserves, overwhelmingly denominated in dollars, though prudence suggests diversification. A first step already being contemplated is an Asian oil market trading in euros. The impact on the international financial system and the balance of global power could be significant. The United States sees India as the weakest link in the emerging Asian chain, he continues, and is trying actively to divert New Delhi away from the task of creating new regional architecture by dangling the nuclear carrot and the promise of world power status in alliance with itself. If the Asian project is to succeed, he warns, India will have to resist these allurements. Similar questions arise with regard to the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, formed in 2001 as a Russia-China-based counterweight to the expansion of U.S. power into former Soviet Central Asia, now evolving rapidly toward a regional security bloc that could soon induct new members, such as India, Pakistan, and Iran, longtime Moscow correspondent Fred Weir reports, perhaps becoming a Eurasian military confederacy to rival NATO. The prospect that Europe and Asia might move toward greater independence has seriously troubled U.S. planners since World War II, and concerns have significantly increased as the tripolar order has continued to evolve, along with new South-South interactions and rapidly growing EU engagement with China. U.S. intelligence has projected that the United States, while controlling Middle East oil for the traditional reasons, will itself rely mainly on more stable Atlantic Basin resources, West Africa, Western Hemisphere. Control of Middle East oil is now far from a sure thing, and these expectations are also threatened by developments in the Western Hemisphere, accelerated by Bush administration policies that have left the United States remarkably isolated in the global arena. The Bush administration has even succeeded in alienating Canada, an impressive feat. Canada's relations with the United States are more strained and combative than ever before as a result of Washington's rejection of NAFTA decisions favoring Canada, Joel Brinkley reports. Partly as a result, Canada is working hard to build up its relationship with China, and some officials are saying Canada may shift a significant portion of its trade, particularly oil, from the United States to China. Canada's Minister of Natural Resources said that within a few years, 1/4 of the oil that Canada now sends to the United States may go to China instead. In a further blow to Washington's energy policies, the leading oil exporter in the hemisphere, Venezuela, has forged probably the closest relations with China of any Latin American country, and is planning to sell increasing amounts of oil to China as part of its effort to reduce dependence on the openly hostile U.S. government. Latin America as a whole is increasing trade and other relations with China, with some setbacks but likely expansion, in particular for raw materials exporters like Brazil and Chile. Meanwhile, Cuba-Venezuela relations are becoming very close, each relying on its comparative advantage. Venezuela is providing low-cost oil, while in return Cuba organizes literacy and health programs, sending thousands of highly skilled professionals, teachers, and doctors who work in the poorest and most neglected areas, as they do elsewhere in the Third World. Cuba-Venezuela projects are extending to the Caribbean countries, where Cuban doctors are providing health care to thousands of people with Venezuelan funding. Operation Miracle, as it is called, is described by Jamaica's ambassador to Cuba as an example of integration and South-South cooperation, and is generating great enthusiasm among the poor majority. Cuban medical assistance is also being welcomed elsewhere. One of the most horrendous tragedies of recent years was the October 2005 earthquake in Pakistan. In addition to the huge toll, unknown numbers of survivors have to face brutal winter weather with little shelter, food, or medical assistance. One has to turn to the South Asian press to read that Cuba has provided the largest contingent of doctors and paramedics to Pakistan, paying all the costs, perhaps with Venezuelan funding, and that President Musharraf expressed his deep gratitude for the spirit and compassion of the Cuban medical teams. These are reported to comprise more than 1,000 trained personnel, 44% of them women, who remain to work in remote mountain villages, living in tents in freezing weather and in an alien culture, after the Western aid teams had been withdrawn, setting up 19 field hospitals and working 12-hour shifts. Some analysts have suggested that Cuba and Venezuela might even unite, a step towards further integration of Latin America in a bloc that is more independent from the United States. Venezuela has joined Mercosur, the South American Customs Union, a move described by Argentine President Nestor Kirchner as a milestone in the development of this trading bloc, and welcomed as opening a new chapter in our integration by Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva. Independent experts say that adding Venezuela to the bloc furthers its geopolitical vision of eventually spreading Mercosur to the rest of the region. At a meeting to mark Venezuela's entry into Mercosur, Venezuelan President Chavez said, "We cannot allow this to be purely an economic project, one for the elites and for the transnational companies," a not very oblique reference to the U.S.-sponsored free trade agreement for the Americas, which has aroused strong public opposition. Venezuela also supplied Argentina with fuel oil to help stave off an energy crisis, and bought almost a third of Argentine debt issued in 2005, one element of a region-wide effort to free the countries from the control of the U.S.-dominated IMF after 2 decades of disastrous effects of conformity to its rules. The IMF has acted towards our country as a promoter and a vehicle of policies that caused poverty and pain among the Argentine people, President Kirchner said in announcing his decision to pay almost $1 trillion to rid itself of the IMF forever. Radically violating IMF rules, Argentina enjoyed a substantial recovery from the disaster left by IMF policies. Steps toward independent regional integration advanced further with the election of Evo Morales in Bolivia in December 2005, the first president from the indigenous majority. Morales moved quickly to reach energy accords with Venezuela. The Financial Times reported that these are expected to underpin forthcoming radical reforms to Bolivia's economy and energy sector, with its huge gas reserves, second only to Venezuela's in South America. Morales, too, committed himself to reverse the neoliberal policies that Bolivia had pursued rigorously for 25 years, leaving the country with lower per capita income than at the outset. Adherence to the neoliberal programs was interrupted during this period only when popular discontent compelled the government to abandon them, as when it followed World Bank advice to privatize water supply and get prices right, incidentally, to deprive the poor of access to water. Venezuelan subversion, as it is described in Washington, is extending to the United States as well. Perhaps that calls for expansion of the policies of containment of Venezuela ordered by Bush in March 2005. In November 2005, the Washington Post reported, a group of senators sent a letter to 9 big oil companies. With huge increases in winter heating bills expected, the letter read, "We want you to donate some of your record profits to help low-income people cover those costs." They received one response, from Citgo, the Venezuelan-controlled company. Citgo offered to provide low-cost oil to low-income residents of Boston, later elsewhere. Chavez is only doing it for political gain, the State Department responded. It is somewhat akin to the government of Cuba, offering scholarships to medical school in Cuba to disadvantaged American youth. Quite unlike aid from the United States and other countries, which is pure-hearted altruism. It is not clear that these subtleties will be appreciated by the recipients of the 12 million gallons of discounted home heating oil provided by Citgo to local charities and 45,000 low-income families in Massachusetts. The oil is distributed to poor people facing a 30 to 50% rise in oil prices, with fuel assistance woefully underfunded, so this is a major shot in the arm for people who otherwise wouldn't get through the winter, according to the director of the nonprofit organization.